I am my mother's attorney." The declaration crashed into the courtroom like thunder on a summer afternoon, startling everyone present. Judge Harrison, who had been casually leafing through a stack of documents, froze mid-turn and lifted his eyes over his wire-rimmed glasses. The voice belonged not to a seasoned lawyer, but to a boy barely 9 years old. David Thompson, thin, bespectacled, and far too young for such a stage, stood firmly beside his mother, Janet. She looked down at him with a mixture of awe and terror, her hands trembling slightly as if unsure whether to hush him or let him continue. Across the polished oak benches, Robert Wellington III, the boy's biological father, nearly choked on his coffee. A man used to commanding boardrooms and intimidating rivals, he found himself momentarily powerless, caught off guard by the child he had largely ignored. "I'm sorry, young man," Judge Harrison said at last, clearing his throat, his voice carrying the tone of someone trying to maintain order. "But this is an adult legal hearing. Children aren't expected to—" "I know that, Your Honor," David said, straightening his glasses with a deliberate motion. His voice, though high-pitched with youth, carried conviction. "But I also know that Article 12 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, ratified by the United States, states that children have the right to express their views in matters that directly affect them." He lifted a tattered school notebook, its corners bent and scribbled margins testifying to long nights of preparation. "And I believe this case affects me more than anyone else here." The courtroom stilled. Even the shuffle of papers ceased. Robert shifted in his seat, the tailored suit on his shoulders suddenly feeling heavier than its price tag, an amount Janet couldn't dream of earning in 6 months. He glanced at his attorneys, his jaw tightening as panics sparked in his eyes. No one on his expensive legal team had prepared him for a 9-year-old quoting international law with the composure of an adult. For years, Janet had been the sole parent, clocking 60-hour weeks as a nursing assistant to keep food on the table and clothes on her son's back. Robert, meanwhile, had drifted in and out, showing up only 4 times in 8 years, each visit marked by extravagant toys and empty words. And now, after a lifetime of near absence, he wanted full custody. "Your Honor," Robert's lead attorney, Dr. Mitchell, interjected, adjusting his tie with practiced precision. His tone was smooth, confident, too confident. "This is highly irregular. The child lacks the legal capacity to—" "With respect," David cut in, his voice calm yet sharp enough to sting, "if you actually cared about my best interests, you wouldn't be trying so hard to silence me. You'd want to hear what I have to say." A murmur rippled across the courtroom. Several adults shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Robert bent toward Dr. Mitchell, whispering something urgent, but David pressed on, his small fingers flipping his notebook open with surprising steadiness. "Your Honor, I have prepared a detailed presentation explaining why I should remain with my mother. It includes evidence about the petitioner's true motives for suddenly seeking custody." He lifted his chin, locking eyes with Robert for the first time that day. "Motives that I believe this court will find very revealing." Robert's face drained of color, his polished composure faltered. What had this child discovered, and how had a boy not yet in middle school managed to prepare more thoroughly than him and his seasoned, high-priced attorneys? Everyone in the room could feel it, the air charged with the sense that something extraordinary was happening. This wasn't just a custody hearing anymore, it was a re-coning, and the truth was about to be delivered by a child who refused to be invisible. Dr. Mitchell quickly gathered himself, leaning forward with renewed authority. "Your Honor, while the boy's creativity is commendable, this court deals with complex family law. Proper representation is required." David snapped his notebook shut, the crack of paper and cardboard echoing like a gavel across the silent courtroom. "Then why hasn't anyone provided me with one?" "In the last 8 months of this case," David began, his tone measured but unflinching, "no one has thought it important to hear from the person most directly affected by this decision, me." A ripple of unease swept the courtroom. Robert Wellington shifted in his leather chair, straightening his expensive tie with hands that suddenly felt clumsy. There was something unsettling about the boy's composure, something far more dangerous than anger. David was calm, and that calmness carried the kind of conviction that couldn't be bought. The boy didn't so much as glance at the lavish suits of the opposing attorneys, nor did he appear cowed by the polished formality of the courtroom. Even the looming presence of his own father, a man used to commanding boardrooms and intimidating adversaries, seemed to wash right over him. Janet, seated just behind her son, watched with a mixture of pride and quiet terror. For weeks she had noticed the strange books he carried home from the library, thick legal codes, children's rights manuals, and volumes of case law far too advanced for a fourth grader. She had assumed it was academic curiosity from her unusually bright child. She never imagined he was laying the groundwork for this very moment. "Your Honor," Dr. Mitchell pressed on, determined to regain control of the hearing. His voice was smooth, practiced. "My client, Mr. Wellington, seeks custody because he is genuinely concerned for his son's welfare. While Ms. Thompson is no doubt devoted, she lacks the financial resources to provide the educational and social opportunities that a gifted child like David deserves." "Genuine concern," David repeated softly, almost to himself. He flipped open his notebook, pages covered in tight, careful handwriting. "Interesting choice of words." He looked up, meeting Judge Harrison's gaze with steady eyes. "Your Honor, may I share a few facts about this supposed genuine concern?" Judge Harrison, who had presided over hundreds of custody disputes, studied the boy carefully. Protocol told him to shut this down, but the poise and preparation radiating from the 9-year-old were unlike anything he had ever encountered. For the first time in years, the seasoned judge leaned forward, intrigued. "David," Janet whispered nervously, tugging lightly at his sleeve, "maybe we should let the lawyers handle this." "What lawyers, Mom?" David interrupted gently, his tone respectful but firm. "We can't afford men like Dr. Mitchell and his colleagues, so either I speak for us, or no one speaks." The words landed with a finality that silenced the room. Robert finally found his voice, though it cracked with a forced paternal tone. "David, son, I know this situation must be confusing for you, but don't call me son." The interruption was cold, sharp. It carried a sting that made more than one person in the courtroom shiver. "In the past 9 years," David continued, his voice unwavering, "you've shown up exactly 4 times. Twice on birthdays, both visits late by 3 weeks. Once at Christmas, when you managed to spare 20 minutes between cocktail parties. And once when a reporter was doing a story on philanthropists and you needed a staged photo with a child." The silence was suffocating. Robert's face tightened as if the words had struck him physically. He opened his mouth to argue, but David pressed on, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "The last time you came, 6 months ago, you spent 15 minutes in our apartment, long enough to sneer at our furniture, complain about the smell of medicine my mom brings home from the hospital, and tell me that I might actually have potential if I were given a proper education." David adjusted his glasses, letting the moment hang before delivering the blow. "Interestingly, exactly 2 weeks later, you filed for custody." Dr. Mitchell bent quickly toward Robert, whispering something urgent into his ear, but David ignored them, his gaze locked on the judge. "Your Honor," he said, voice steady as stone, "I've done some research on my biological father." He flipped to another page in his notebook. "I discovered he recently lost a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against his business partners. I discovered his third wife has filed for a highly contested divorce. And I discovered something very interesting about a trust fund established by my late grandmother, his mother." Robert's complexion drained from pink to ashen white in a matter of seconds. Even his lawyers looked startled, exchanging frantic glances. How on earth had a child dug up information that they themselves hadn't unearthed? David turned another page in his notebook and for the first time since stepping into the courtroom smiled. But it wasn't the smile of a child. It was the confident, razor-sharp smile of someone holding the winning hand and daring his opponent to make the next move. Before we talk about inheritances and financial motives, David continued, shutting the notebook with a soft thud, maybe we should discuss why a man who never showed any real interest in being a father has suddenly developed such a powerful paternal instinct. Robert was sweating visibly now. The courtroom, accustomed to polished arguments and rehearsed performances, sat frozen in stunned silence. His expensive attorneys, usually quick with rebuttals, looked utterly unmoored because there was no legal script for this. What exactly had this boy uncovered during his long afternoons at the library? How had a child managed to dig deeper into the truth than a team of adults with virtually unlimited resources? Judge Harrison leaned forward, his voice softer now, but edged with curiosity. In 30 years on the bench, he had never seen anything quite like this. David, the judge said slowly, you mentioned evidence. What exactly is it that you've brought with you today? What kind of evidence, Judge Harrison asked slowly, could a 9-year-old possibly have gathered? David adjusted his glasses again, that deliberate little movement that had become his trademark in the courtroom. Your Honor, for the past 3 months, ever since I learned of this lawsuit, I've spent every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon at the Central Public Library. Researching what exactly? Dr. Mitchell interrupted, his voice tinged with condescension. Public records, newspaper archives, corporate filings, prior court cases involving Mr. Wellington. David spoke without hesitation, as if he had rehearsed this moment in his head 100 times. He flipped open a clean section of his notebook. The head librarian, Ms. Rodriguez, she has a master's degree in information science, taught me how to access basic legal databases. Janet's hand flew to her mouth. For months, David had told her he was working on a special project. She had assumed it was some school assignment. She never imagined his secret project was saving their family. Robert Wellington finally lost control. His face flushed crimson as he stood half out of his chair. This is outrageous. A 9-year-old digging through my private affairs like some amateur detective? Public information, sir, David corrected, his voice calm, almost gentle. Perfectly legal, accessible to any American citizen, regardless of age. Behind those words lay an even greater truth, that the boy had outmaneuvered men 3 times his age simply by caring enough to look. For Ms. Rodriguez, the librarian, David had become more than a curious child. When he first showed up, asking how family courts worked, she recognized the desperation hiding under his determination. Later, she confided to Janet, that boy has been coming here like clockwork for months. He reads legal codes like other kids read comic books. He's learning too quickly, too seriously. This isn't just curiosity. This is survival. David's voice brought everyone back to the present. I discovered that in the last 18 months, Mr. Wellington has been involved in 3 major lawsuits. He lost a $2.3 million dispute with his former business partners. His current wife, his third, has filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Specifically, hiding marital assets. Robert's face turned beet red. How dare you? And more interestingly, David continued smoothly, flipping another page, I discovered that my late grandmother, Eleanor Wellington, established a trust fund worth $1.7 million in my name. That trust becomes accessible either when I turn 18 or when my biological father gains full legal custody of me. The silence that followed was crushing. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to buzz more quietly. Dr. Mitchell bent low, whispering frantically into Robert's ear, but Robert sat frozen, jaw clenched, eyes locked on his son, as if he were staring at a stranger. "This is no coincidence," David pressed on, voice steady. "My grandmother died when I was 2. For 7 years my father never told her I existed. He denied her the chance to know she had a grandson. He told my mother, and I quote, 'My family doesn't need to know about it.'" Janet's eyes filled with tears. She remembered that day as if it were yesterday, the cold dismissal, the way Robert had reduced her baby to an it. But when Mrs. Eleanor Wellington eventually found out about me through her own price, Vate investigator, she set up the trust with one very clear condition. David paused, letting the tension draw out, the entire courtroom holding its breath. The money would be released for my care and education only if my father showed genuine, consistent commitment by obtaining custody. If he never did, the money would pass directly to me at 18 with no parental control. It was arithmetic as cruel as it was simple. For 9 years, Robert had ignored his son. The window for genuine custody had passed. Now, desperate and financially cornered, he was attempting to force custody, not out of love, but out of greed. "My grandmother couldn't have predicted everything," David continued, snapping his notebook shut. "But what she didn't know was that her son would grow into a man who destroys small family businesses for profit." "Your Honor, this has gone far enough." Dr. Mitchell shot to his feet, his voice sharp with frustration. "The child is throwing out unsubstantiated accusations. This is not a proper hearing. I can prove everything I'm saying." David reached into his school backpack and pulled out a neatly labeled manila folder, surprisingly professional for someone his age. He placed it on the judge's desk with both hands. Inside are copies of 17 lawsuits filed in the last 5 years against Wellington Industries. Each one involves families who lost their homes or small businesses after my father's company purchased their properties at a fraction of their value, using insider information from his contacts in local banks. Janet's heart pounded as she watched her son transform the custody hearing into what looked dangerously close to a criminal investigation. And all of it armed with nothing but a library card and relentless determination. David pulled out a set of photographs clipped together. This family, for example, the Santos family, immigrants from Mexico. They owned a small bakery and worked 18 hours a day to keep it open. When their youngest child was hospitalized, they fell 3 months behind on their loan. Mr. Wellington's friend at the bank tipped him off. And within weeks, Wellington Industries swooped in, forcing them to sell at a loss. Robert was drenched in sweat now, his expensive suit offering no armor against the boy's words. "This has nothing to do with custody," Robert blurted. "It has everything to do with custody," David interrupted, his voice slicing clean through his father's protest. "Because it proves a pattern. A man who preys on vulnerable families for financial gain. And now, when he is most desperate, he's preying on his own." Judge Harrison leafed through the folder, his face darkening as he skimmed the documents. This was no childish fantasy. These were real cases, real records. "Where did you get this, David?" the judge asked gravely. "Public records, newspaper archives, state business registries," David answered, reciting the sources as though reading off a grocery list. "Ms. Rodriguez taught me something important. The truth is almost always available to the public. You just have to know where to look." Dr. Mitchell tried one last desperate push. "Even if these allegations hold some truth, Your Honor, they do not change the fact that my client can provide superior educational opportunities for this child. Ms. Thompson cannot compete." David closed his notebook, then slowly opened it again to the very last section. He looked up at the judge, his lips curling into that sharp, deliberate smile. Not the innocent grin of a boy, but the expression of someone who knew the next card he was about to play would end the game. "About education," David said, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "Perhaps I should share something very interesting about Mr. Wellington's educational plans for me." At that moment, Robert Wellington finally understood. His arrogance, his money, his lawyers, none of it mattered anymore. He had underestimated the one person he thought too small to fight back. His 9-year-old son wasn't just intelligent. He was strategic. He had uncovered secrets that even Robert's own attorneys hadn't dared to investigate. The courtroom, packed with silent onlookers, now leaned forward, every breath suspended, waiting for the final blow. What exactly had David discovered about Robert's true plans for his education? Judge Harrison asked gravely. David opened the final section of his notebook with the precision of a surgeon. "On the subject of education, Your Honor, I would like to share Mr. Wellington's true plans for me." Robert's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. For the first time in years, the millionaire businessman looked small, cornered, not by a rival executive, but by his own son. "During one of the 4 times I've seen him in the past 9 years," David began methodically, "I overheard a phone conversation. Mr. Wellington referred to me not as his son, but as the child problem." Dr. Mitchell leapt to his feet. "Your Honor, private conversations cannot—" "I can prove every word," David interrupted, pulling a small digital recorder from his briefcase. "Ms. Rodriguez taught me something important. In law, evidence matters. Documentation matters." The silence was so thick it was almost suffocating. Even the bailiff looked stunned. David placed the recorder in front of the judge. "This was recorded during his last visit to our apartment 6 months ago. Mr. Wellington believed I was in my room doing homework. The device was left running in the living room." Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow. "David, are you certain you want this admitted into evidence?" "Absolutely certain, Your Honor." The judge pressed play. Robert's unmistakable voice filled the courtroom, cold and calculating. "Listen, as soon as I get legal custody, the boy is going straight to Riverside Military Academy. It's strict. They know how to handle troubled children. He'll stay there until he's 18, and I'll have full access to the inheritance funds for educational expenses." "Yes, exactly. $500 a month for boarding, the rest is mine. The kid doesn't even need to know. It's a perfect solution. She's out of the picture, I look like a responsible father, and I have the money." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Janet sobbed into her hands, her entire body trembling. She had always suspected Robert was cold, but never imagined he could be so cruel. David's voice broke the silence. "There's more." The second half of the recording played. Robert's tone hardened. "The problem isn't just the money. The boy's too smart for his own good. He asks questions, notices things. Best to keep him out of the way until 18. Kids like him, well, let's just say we don't want him getting ideas above his station." Robert slammed his fist on the table, his mask finally slipping. "This is a trap. He provoked me on purpose. A 9-year-old can't—" "A 9-year-old can't what?" David cut him off, his small voice carrying more power than the man's roar. "Can't be intelligent? Can't protect himself? Can't expose the truth about a father who sees him as a problem instead of a son?" The judge shut off the recorder with a sharp click. His eyes bore into Robert. "Mr. Wellington, the implications of this evidence are damning. Combined with the financial records, this paints a devastatingly clear picture of your true motivations." "Your Honor," David added quietly, "I also investigated Riverside Military Academy. In the past 5 years, 3 students have died by suicide. Federal investigations are ongoing into abuse of minors. This is where my father wanted to send me, not for education, for disposal." Dr. Mitchell's face had turned ashen. "Your Honor, even if some of this—" To do what? David interrupted, his voice rising with controlled fury. To send me to a place where children die? To siphon my inheritance while pretending to care? To isolate me from the only person who has ever truly loved me? Robert lost what little composure he had left. You insolent little brat! You're nothing but an arrogant child who doesn't know his place. David turned his gaze on him, steady, calm, devastating. I'm your son, and you are nothing but a stranger who shares my DNA. A real father wouldn't try to get rid of his child to steal his money. The gavel cracked like thunder. Order in the court! Judge Harrison's voice rang out. Mr. Wellington, sit down immediately or I will have you removed. David flipped to the final page of his notebook. Your Honor, there is one last matter, something I discovered in the estate files. Robert paled further, if such a thing were possible. David's voice softened. I found a letter from my grandmother, addressed to me, intended to be opened at 16. Miss Rodriguez helped me confirm that given the circumstances of this custody case, I could legally request early access. The letter explains why she created the trust. The boy took a steady breath. She wrote that she never trusted her son to be a good father. She created the trust specifically to protect me from him. She even instructed me, if he ever tried to seize custody for money, to use every available resource in the trust to defend myself. Robert slumped forward in his chair, beaten. David raised his chin. She also hired investigators who documented his financial crimes. Those files are with the trust's administrator, ready to be released if needed. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. The judge banged the gavel again, this time with finality. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, financial, testimonial, and recorded, the custody petition is categorically denied. Furthermore, I am ordering a full investigation into possible fraud, misappropriation, and abuse of trust funds. Dr. Mitchell leaned toward Robert, whispering urgently, but the case was dead. The empire of intimidation and arrogance had crumbled in less than an hour, dismantled by the very boy Robert had dismissed as insignificant. David calmly packed away his folders and recorder, each motion precise, deliberate, controlled. The courtroom marveled not only at his brilliance but at his composure. He was 9 years old, yet carried himself with the poise of someone far older. Before sitting down, he raised his hand politely. Your Honor, may I make one final request? You may, David. The boy turned, not to the judge, but to his father. His voice, though quiet, carried through every corner of the room. I want Mr. Wellington to understand something. I didn't do this out of anger. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because every child deserves a family who loves them, not one that sees them as a financial opportunity. The words landed heavier than any gavel. Robert Wellington, once a titan in business and intimidation, sat broken in silence, defeated not by a rival, but by the son he never truly saw. As Robert Wellington left the room escorted by security guards, the judge had ordered his immediate arrest for attempted fraud. David finally allowed a small smile to appear on his face. In that silent courtroom, a 9-year-old child had just proven that intelligence, preparation, and true love can defeat any amount of money and privilege. But David's victory represented something much greater than a simple custody battle. It was the beginning of a transformation that would change his family's life forever. 3 years passed since that historic day in court, and David Thompson's life unfolded in ways even his precocious intelligence could never have predicted. The recording that destroyed Robert Wellington not only won the case, it went viral on social media, making David an unlikely national symbol of a generation of children refusing to accept injustice in silence. The video racked up over 50 million views, sparking debates in classrooms, parliaments, and households across the country. It even inspired legislative changes in 17 U.S. states, strengthening protections for children's rights in family law disputes. Today, we welcome 12-year-old David Thompson, who 3 years ago shocked the nation by defending his mother in court using nothing but his wits and a public library, announced the host of America's most watched morning show. David, how does it feel to be called the smartest kid in America? David, now taller, with a thoughtful gaze behind new glasses but still carrying the same calm presence, smiled softly. I'd rather just be called David, the kid who learned that every child has a voice,